pleasure to welcome you to the defense of Simone, defense of her Ph.D. thesis. My name is Joseph Ullman. I'm an associate professor at the Engineering Systems Division of the Management Engineering Department. And so, while I'm of course very glad to see Simone defend, I'm also a little bit sad because this will formally mark the end of a Ph.D. engagement with us in the group. I'd like to welcome the examiners. The examiners are those people who have a lot of work to do before and during the defense. So, very warm welcome to you. The internal examiner is Professor Anja Meyer, Professor of Engineering Systems at the Engineering Systems Division at the DTU Management Department. Then I'm welcoming Jürgen Eckelund from the Unit of Ergonomics at the School of Technology, KTH Sweden, and Susse Georg, Department of Planning of Aalborg University in Copenhagen. So, very warm welcome. Of course, also welcoming you, Simone Nyholm Andersen, defending her PhD thesis, and her advisors, Associate Professor Ole Broberg, Engineering Systems Division, and Emeritus Associate Professor Erling Haun, being a co-supervisor of the thesis until 2014. Of course, very warm welcome to all of our guests here today. Let me briefly explain the proceedings today. So, what's going to happen next is that Simone will give her presentation of around 45 minutes. We'll then have about a 10-minute break back to the full hour. During the break, if anybody from the audience would like to ask questions after the break, please approach me so I can put you on the list for the question session. Then after the break, the questions are going to start, and that will be the role of the examiners. That will last approximately an hour and a half, plus or minus. Then the supervisors have the opportunity to ask additional questions, and then it will be to the all guests in the auditorium to ask questions. After that, the examiners will retreat for their final discussion. That will be about 30 minutes, and I think we'll take the liberty of starting the reception outside as the examiners are discussing, and then they will rejoin us with the final conclusion. Any questions at this point? If not, then I give the floor to Simone Nyholm Andersen. She will be presenting her master thesis, PhD thesis, titled Participatory Simulation in Hospital Work System Design, a presentation of the same title. Very much looking forward to it. Simone, the floor is all yours.
Thank you. Yeah, welcome to my defense. First of all, some practical stuff. The study was financed by the Danish Work Environment Research Foundation and DTU Management. And I'll start with an example. So, this guy is named Per, and he is an orderly at a hospital in Denmark. And it means that every day he pushes around patients in beds for miles and miles in corridors. He works within the hospital sector, which is one of the toughest work environments in Denmark. And therefore also he and his colleagues have the highest share of work-related problems. But can we improve this when we build new hospitals? Per was asked to help improve it because he was asked to participate in a simulation event. And this is a picture from that event. And the idea of that event was to contribute to the design of the corridors of a new hospital in Denmark. And they used what can be called full-scale mock-ups. And this is a full-scale mock-up of a proposed design of a new hallway, and it's based on plywood walls and foam blocks. Per simulated his work within this mock-up, and because he had knowledge on how to operate the bed, he and the participating architect here could see that the design was too narrow. So Per and the architects decided to adjust the design. And what they did was that they moved this wall. And by moving that wall, they could see that Per's work posture was improved, and thereby also his colleagues' work postures in the future hospital. And this is what participatory simulation is about. It's abbreviated as PS, and it's a method to involve employees in imitating, exploring, and designing their own future work system. And note that this is design of work systems, because when designing the new physical space, this space influences and is influenced by other elements, such as the employees and how they conduct their work practices, and the technologies and tools they use, and the information they change, and how they organize their work. Thereby, PS is a method for designing hospital work systems or work systems in general. This was an example of PS, and the rest of the presentation will be based on this outline. And I'll start with the background of the study. Almost 10 years ago now, the Danish government decided to renew the hospitals. And right now there is around 43 projects going on, and they are indicated by these orange dots in the map. And these projects, they range from design and construction of completely new super hospital, centralizing a lot of functions, and smaller renovation of existing hospitals. And as a part of this renewal process, the regional councils decided to fund different innovation centers. And the aim of these centers was to involve the healthcare professionals from the existing hospitals in the design of the new hospitals. And the method they used can be related to PS. PS can take different forms, and I studied 3 different forms in 3 cases. The first case was tabletop simulation, and this was used to design a new outpatient clinic at a major hospital in Denmark. It showed to be a method that was suitable in the early design phase, because this was in relation to how to design the overall layout of the building. And it was based on these cardboard boxes that represented future examination rooms, and based on these Lego figures that represented healthcare professionals and patients. They involved healthcare professionals from the existing outpatient clinic to simulate their future work in this tabletop model. And by configuring these boxes in different ways, different overall layouts of the future building could be simulated. They were simulated by using predefined scenarios based on task sequences, and the participants moved around the Lego figures in accordance with these task sequences. The outcome of this case was a concept for an overall layout of the building and a new way of organizing their work to support this layout. The second case was the full-scale mock-ups I presented as the first example. These mock-ups was a part of designing a new a major new hospital in Denmark, and they were used in the detailed design phase, where the focus was on the design of each specific room. It was based on these plywood walls and standard furniture. And by building the future hospital rooms in these mock-ups, they invited healthcare professionals from the existing hospitals in the regions to participate. And these healthcare professionals were going to move into this new hospital. The outcome of these simulations was based on adjustments of the dimensions of the rooms, because they could move the walls and test different dimensions out. And also adjustments on how to organize the layout of the interior in the rooms. The third case was these blueprint simulations. They were used right before an intensive care unit was going to move into new facilities. And thereby, it was in the late design phase where the physical space was fixed, but the other elements of the work system were still going to be designed, such as organization and the work practices. And it was based on these blueprints of the future department and the Lego figures representing patients and healthcare professionals. And the employees from the existing intensive care unit were involved in simulating the future work by using these blueprints. They did that by getting predefined scenarios which they had to solve within the new physical space. And the outcome of this case was that the employees were able to create a new organization that supported the new physical workspace. The goal of these three examples showed to be the same, because they all had the purpose of securing the future employee well-being. This was related to the future work environment, but they were also aiming at securing the future system performance. And this was in relation to efficiency and to provide a high quality experience for the patients. And these two elements are related to human factors and ergonomics. And therefore, I applied an ergonomic approach. And ergonomics is defined as the scientific discipline concerning with understanding of interactions among humans and other elements of a system, and in this case, a hospital work system. And it's the profession that applies theory, principle, data, and methods to design in order to optimize human well-being and the overall system performance. And the practitioner of this scientific field is defined as ergonomists. Therefore, I looked into the ergonomic literature, and I looked for how have the existing literature addressed simulation. And what I could see that the focus has until now been on controlled simulations, where the ergonomists act as an expert and ask the employees to do a specific task through a simulation. For example, this picture. Then afterwards, the ergonomists are taking an expert role and analyzes the ergonomic consequences of that simulation. But PS is more than this, because in PS, the ergonomists also take on a facilitating role, where he facilitates the process of involving employees in imitating and designing their own future work system. But the literature on PS showed to be limited, and therefore the participatory simulation phenomenon taking place in the innovation centers in Denmark at the moment provided a unique possibility for studying PS within practice, and then extend the knowledge base on this method. And this leads me to the study aim. Because the aim of this study was to explore PS as a method for designing ergonomic hospital work systems. An ergonomic work system means that it's a work system taking into account the human well-being and the system performance. Based on a literature review and an introductional study of the PS taking place in the innovation centers in Denmark, I was able to adapt a model to describe the PS phenomenon. And PS can be defined by these three frames. The first frame is the existing work systems, which is the existing hospital systems in Denmark. Then there is the PS events taking place in the innovation centers. And then there is the work system design processes in the form of architectural and engineering design processes of the Danish hospitals in Denmark. The first frame is populated by employees and managers. And the third frame is populated by designers and project owners and project managers. And ideally, actors from both frames participate in the simulation events to ensure the communication between these two frames. Almost all of the PS events included some kind of medium that represented a possible design of the future work system. In my cases, it was the full-scale mock-ups and the tabletop models and the blueprints. And by exploring the design through these mediums, the aim is to evaluate the future ergonomic conditions. And based on these conditions, the outcome of simulation events is to formulate design specifications on how to improve the future ergonomic conditions of the work system. This is a kind of knowledge on how to design the future work system in an ergonomic way, and therefore I saw this as ergonomic knowledge. This knowledge had to be transferred and integrated within the design in order to actually have a design impact. Based on this model, I was able to define 3 research questions that guided my study. The first one is, how are simulation media in PS influencing the ergonomic evaluation? And how is ergonomic knowledge created in PS? And how is ergonomic knowledge from PS transferred to design processes and integrated into the design? My study was a paper-based study, and it means that I investigated these 3 research questions through 6 delimited studies that are communicated as scientific papers. And 2 of the papers are published in international journals, 3 of them are published in conference proceedings, and 1 is still under review. And because I did a paper-based study, each of these papers had their own methodological section. So when I'm going to explain about the methodology in the next couple of slides, it will be the overall methodology of the study. I did a case study, and a case study is relevant when the purpose is to investigate a phenomenon in depth and within a real-life context. And I my aim was to investigate these 3 cases into depth, and they took place within the Danish Innovation Centers as a real-life context. The data collection was based on 3 types. First, I observed 10 PS events. Then I video recorded 14 PS events, and I obtained video recordings from other sources as well. And I interviewed 38 participants from these simulation events and actors in the design processes. The data was analyzed through an abductive approach, which means that I switched between looking into the empirical world and thereby analyzing my empirical data, and looking into the theoretical world, thereby analyzing the literature on the topic. And this iterative process supported the exploratory approach of my case study, because it enabled me to continuously adjust the direction of the study in accordance to what I could see both in the data and in the theory. In the next part, I will go into the investigation of my 3 research questions. The first research question zoomed in on the medium and how this influenced the economic evaluation. I had an idea that different media were able to support evaluation of different parts of the future work system. But for me to be able to analyze this, I needed a theoretical lens where I could view my data through. And I applied the lens which I called the work system lens. This lens defines a work system as being constituted of 6 different elements. And I will go into that later. I used the lens to analyze these 2 cases. And what I was interested in was understanding how these 2 different media, the tabletop models and the full-scale mock-ups, influenced how participants were able to identify future possible economic challenges, but also how they were able to evaluate whether these were challenges or not. I did a video analysis where I looked at how the participant addressed the economic consequences, and this was my results. What you can see at the x-axis is the 6 elements from the theoretical lens that constitutes a work system. At the y-axis, you can see the amount of identified economic challenges in relation to each of these 6 elements. The interesting part was that full-scale mock-ups showed to support identification of economic consequences in relation to the technologies and tools and the space, where the tabletop models showed to be more supportive in relation to the organization of the work system. This showed to be related to what I defined as media attributes. And I defined 2 attributes. First, fidelity, and then affordance. Fidelity is defined as the level of detail or sophistication of what is manifested, and thereby manifested by the medium. And affordance is defined as the properties of the thing that determine how the thing possibly could be used. And the thing in this case is the medium. I could see that the tabletop models had high fidelity in relation to the overall layout of the building, but very low fidelity in relation to each of the rooms and how they were designed, because they were only manifested by a cardboard box. Furthermore, they afforded that participants could configure the boxes in different ways and thereby test different layouts. This supported the identification of ergonomic challenges in relation to how the layout influenced the organization of their work. But they were actually also able to evaluate which layout that were most suitable for their future organization of work. In the full-scale mockups, the fidelity was very high on each of these rooms because they were dimensionally stable, but the overall layout of the building was not manifested by these mockups because it was single rooms. Furthermore, the mockups afforded that participants could operate the technologies by pushing beds around and also try different shapes of the rooms because they could move the walls. This supported the identification in relation to the physical space and the technologies and tools, but they were actually also able to evaluate elements of this. For instance, how the shape of the room influenced the work postures of the future employees. Thereby, this investigation showed that simulation media attributes influence the type of ergonomic evaluation, influence the type of ergonomic conditions that can be evaluated in PS. So now I told you about how the medium influence the ergonomic evaluation, but how are these evaluations transformed into design specifications on how to design the future work system? This was the focus of the second research question. Here I zoomed in on the process of creating this simulation outcome. And because this outcome was a knowledge on how to design the future work system in an ergonomic way, I saw this as ergonomic knowledge. Looking into the literature on PS, I could see that researchers had indicated that PS could be a kind of knowledge creation process. Looking at my data, I could see that participants shared knowledge and combined knowledge, and all was about knowledge. So therefore, I applied a theoretical lens, which I called knowledge creation lens, that enabled me to analyze the process of creating this ergonomic knowledge. I used the lens on analysis of these three cases, and I analyzed how their outcomes were created. Even though they had different outcomes, the process to reach that showed to be very similar. And by applying a process mining approach where I looked at sequences of activities, I was able to define a framework that described the knowledge creation process in PS. And I will present that to you now. The first activity of PS was that participants started to share their personal experiences from their existing workplace. This resulted in participants starting experimenting with how to design the future work system based on these experiences. This was both through acting of scenarios and discussions. The experiments were tightly connected to the simulation medium, and therefore the participants interacted with the simulation medium to explore different designs. And this took place at the same time, indicated by the gray square around here. Some of the experiments also led backwards to more experience sharing. but most of the design experiments led to participants started to reflect. And they addressed the ergonomic consequences of their design experiments in these reflections. A lot of the reflections led backwards to an iterative process between experimenting with work system design and reflecting on the ergonomic consequences. And the reflections were also tightly connected to interactions with the simulation medium. A small amount of these reflections resulted actually in the simulation outcome in the form of design specifications. And this shows that the participants went through a lot of iterations of activities before they actually reached the simulation outcome, and thereby the created ergonomic knowledge. So this investigation showed that sequences and overlaps of knowledge creation activities are the sources of ergonomic knowledge in PS. So now I showed you how the outcome of PS is created, but in order for PS to have a design impact, this outcome has to be transferred and integrated within design. And this was the focus of the third research question. Here I zoomed in on the transition between the PS events and the design processes. And because I saw the outcome as ergonomic knowledge, I decided to also apply a theoretical lens on knowledge on this research. Therefore, I applied the knowledge transfer and integration lens. And this enabled me to understand how this knowledge was transferred from this PS events into the design processes. I analyzed this theoretical frame in an analysis of the full-scale mock-up case. Here I was interested in understanding how the adjustments of the room dimensions and the adjustments of the interior layout were transferred to the architects and engineers in the design process, and how these actors were integrating it into the design. I could see that when the engineers and the architects participated in the simulation events, they obtained intermediary abilities, because they could act as boundary spanners between the PS taking place in the Innovation Center and the design taking place in the design office. They obtained experience from these simulation events, which they transferred back to the design office and transformed them into adjustments of the architectural blueprints. And these adjustments were how they integrated their knowledge. When architects and engineers were not able to participate in the simulation events, the facilitators documented the created knowledge in different objects. This was sketches and descriptions. And these objects embedded the knowledge created and were able to transfer it into the design process and into the designers. Designers, they interpreted this knowledge and they integrated it by doing adjustments of the architectural blueprint. This arrow is entangled because this is not a linear process. Not all of the knowledge documented in these objects were directly integrated. And this was because the design process showed to have design constraints on how the overall building layout was defined and how the rooms were connected. This is described by an architect as this. If I get information which doesn't fit the building shape and format, I need to analyze what I think their intentions are, and then squeeze it into the square I have available. Therefore, a huge part of the architects and the engineers' work was actually to try to fit this knowledge into the design constraint work system design. But the project owner had another approach on this design process. For instance, the facilitator of the PS event described it as this. Sometimes it's hard to get the architects to see the room's function. We have never imagined that it should be the physical frame that decided the function. And these two quotes show two approaches to the work system design and how important it is to include how the knowledge is transferred and integrated in the planning of these PS events. Therefore, this study showed that intermediary actors and objects embedding ergonomic knowledge are means of transferring it, and interpretation and transformation of this knowledge are means of integrating it into the design. The next part, I will go into a synthesis of my study. Based on the investigations of the research questions and a literature review, I was able to do a synthesis across my study. And in this, I identified the characteristics of PS. I identified 4 elements that constituted the PS method. The first element is the medium. It always includes some kind of medium that represent a possible design of the future work system. In my cases, the medium was full-scale mock-ups and tabletop models, but it could also be computer-based, such as virtual reality. Then there is some kind of scenario of the future work going to take place in the new work system. And this scenario simulation has to be facilitated. Then there is the participants. And the participants are employees from the existing work systems, and ideally also the architects, the engineers, and the other designers going to include this knowledge in their design work. The last element is that the outcome has to be documented and communicated in order to actually have a design impact. Based on variations of these 4 elements, I was able to develop a taxonomy. And this taxonomy, I call that the PS taxonomy. And the aim of this taxonomy was to support researchers in analyzing and categorizing PS, and support practitioners in planning and facilitating PS. And I'll go into the practical aspect now. Because in order to turn the scientific aspects of the taxonomy into applicable tools for practitioners, I developed 3 guides that supplemented my PS taxonomy and a brochure. These guides are based on decision trees and is a tool for practitioners to use when planning PS. I tested the guides in a workshop with ergonomists and architects, engineers, and innovation consultants, and I asked them to use the guide to plan a PS event in relation to their own work. And in general, the participants found the guides useful. One of them described it as, it gives a comprehensive overview and then makes you reflect on your choices. This workshop also showed that in order for these guides to get an uptake in the research, in the practice community, it's also important for the project owners to prioritize PS and allocate resources for it. Furthermore, this workshop also showed that it's important for the practitioners to get a basic introduction to this tool and how to apply it. And my last part is conclusion and implications. The aim of this study was to explore PS as a method for designing ergonomic hospital work systems. And the study shows that PS is a method with high potential for being an ergonomic design method. But in order to utilize this potential, the medium has to be chosen on how it can support the ergonomic evaluation intended, and the process has to be facilitated in order to obtain the intended ergonomic knowledge, and actors and objects have to be included to obtain the intended transfer and integration of the created knowledge. And these parts of the scientific research were put into practice within the taxonomy and the supplementing guides. We have to take into account that this study was conducted within the